is basically an overview of what Power to the Profession is, and it basically states, well, everyone have a chance to read it. It's about the initiative that was started by NACI. The purpose of the Power to Profession is to better define the early childhood profession by establishing a unified framework, a career path, qualifications, standards, and compensation. And the initiative, the original goal of the initiative is to unify the entire profession. So right now, would you all say that the early childhood profession is unified? Do we make the same money? Do we have the same rules, the same jobs? I mean, how would you all define the early childhood profession now? Do you feel like it's equal across the board, across the state, nationally, all that good stuff?
I know it is not. It depends upon the organization and its funding resources. To a certain extent, it may be as far as within a particular state, but not nationwide, because we have gateways, we have other indicators like NACI, but there's some requirements within Chicago or the state of Illinois that a teacher has to have, but it's not comprehensive. They may have to have an AA, or they recommend a bachelor's degree, but for several credentials, they have specific requirements for.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Well, the question is why now? Why all of a sudden are we promoting early childhood education? Why do we have the need for the power to the profession? Why do we need to promote our profession? As more public and private money goes into the early childhood field, early educators must elevate the profession in order to ensure that not only the current funding and resources that we receive now are continuous, and we receive more funding and resources in the future. And the best way to put that to use, of course, is always to deliver the best outcome for children. When it comes to investing, we want, in order to elevate the profession, and for our investors or those who help pay into the field, we have to let them know, why are they paying into this? What is it about this field that they can invest in and makes it worthwhile? Power to Profession also discusses how we can be equal nationally. When you consider yourself an early childhood educator, it's someone who works with children birth through age 8. When I started digging into the profession, I just felt like, oh, this is, it's LSSI. We already are beginning to work with early childhood, children ages 2 to 5, so we already are in the field. But this initiative is an initiative for everyone. So everyone who works in the field, they want them to somehow contribute somehow. Even with what we do on a daily basis, it contributes to the profession. But we were not considered professionals in the past. And now the big movement is, how can we consider ourselves a profession and build upon that and make us known nationwide that we're just as important as nurses, we're just as important as accountants, we're just as important as all these other fields, that they're considered professionals because they have a set. I'm jumping ahead again. Okay, so I'm jumping too fast. A profession is built upon purpose, a shared purpose, an agreement, a responsibility is defined by the profession itself. So by professionals within the profession. And they have some of these components. Distinct responsibilities, who's responsible for what? A scope of practice, what can you be expected to perform, and what you cannot be expected to perform. Standards and expectations, education requirements, higher education accreditation, continual education requirements, certification, licensing from the state board, legal consequences for negligent practices. Now, while early childhood education field has some of these components, the Power to the Profession will establish a unifying framework, and this will include all of these components and ensure that they apply across all education settings that serve birth through age 8. So how will the early childhood education profession become a more unified profession? The core components of the profession would be to establish a series of 8 decision cycles. And I gave you all a copy of the 8 decision cycles, like this. So the power group, NACY got together with about 15 nationwide national members, and they formed a task force. So on the packet that you have, it has all of the members who are part of the task force. It includes a few like the American Federation of State, the American Federation of Teachers, the Associate Degree in Early Childhood, just to name a few, and it includes all of those who are the task force to determine what we're going to do for Power of the Profession, to promote it. So the first decision cycle was, who are early childhood educators and what do they do? And they have completed the first 2 decision cycles. The second one is, what should they know and be able to do? And based on that, they have decided, now that we are in the decision cycle 3, 4, and 5 are what we're currently in right now. So in order to promote the profession, we can no longer say, hey, what do you do for a living? I'm a teacher, or I'm a director. We are all early childhood educators. And to first define who are early childhood educators, they said, okay, we need a name. So they came up with, we're early childhood educators, and our profession is, we teach early childhood education. So we're no longer babysitters, we're no longer daycare providers, we're no longer any of these other names and acronyms that we were given in the past, because this is our profession and we want to be stand out as professionals. So they started the cycles. So we already know with early childhood educators, who is considered an early childhood educator are people who work with children from birth to 8 years old. And once they defined who early childhood educators were, it was like, what about K through 3rd? Do they consider themselves early childhood educators? And then so in order to collaborate and to make everybody on the same page, which is what the Power to Profession wants to do, is make everyone equal as far as not pay necessarily, but we're all in the same profession, we're all doing the same thing. We could come together and be on the same level. So that was the goal of the Power to the Profession, was to do all of that. So in beginning that, they began to come up with questions on, how can we do this as a team? What can we do to come together? And so the first question that I want to ask you all is, do you feel that we are unified in early childhood education? And we asked that, and we said, no, we're not. So does the lack of our unification in the field, and the fact that we don't know what the early childhood education field profession is, does it support us or hinder us from getting more public funding?
Hinders us, because every nurse, you can be a nurse in Chicago, but you can go to Hawaii and be a nurse, you can go to Mississippi and be a nurse. There are certain standards and credentials. As a early childhood educator, it depends on where you're at and what those standards look like. So there has to be a consistent format if we're going to be professionals. If we're going to elevate this profession into one of recognition, not only by others, but most importantly by our funders in Congress. They need to look at that, and we have to, I guess, establish things that enable us to have specific credentials. Just like with your CPA, your CPA anywhere. But early childhood site director, teacher, depending on where you go, there's inconsistencies, not only in salaries, but in expectations. So if this is going to be a profession, it should reflect something similar to family, a social worker or a nurse.
But I think for some of those that you're mentioning, while there's an educational level, there are state board certifications that you have to take. I can't take my nursing license in Illinois and go to Wisconsin until I take the Wisconsin boards.
Really?
So, yeah, and the same for being an attorney.
Attorney?
You have to pass the
bar
in that area, yeah.
So what is
So there's
an
an education level. Well, that's the the PEL, what used to be the 04,
Yeah.
the teacher certification that people apply for.
Will it be acceptable anywhere you go?
No.
None of them
No.
are universal,
No.
none of them.
State.
An
So it's a
attorney,
state, so it's gonna be a state standard then?
Yeah.
that's what
Oh,
exists for
40.
other professions.
Okay.
Yes.
Because we're in a country where we have balanced federal
A state.
and
Right, the
state
state,
rights,
mhm.
and
Okay.
it's,
Okay.
the states decide what an attorney needs to know and be able to do
Right.
in their state.
Because there's different rules for each state.
So each state then needs to have unified set of requirements and codes and
We should
certifications.
have, but not, currently it's not.
No.
Like a pharmacist too.
Oh,
My niece is a doctorate in
Mhm.
pharmacist and she have to apply again. She moved to
Mhm.
Boston from Illinois. So
Mhm.
she have to take a test and the certificate they accept in Boston, not from Illinois.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's supposed to work.
So each state have their own expectation.
Mhm.
So it's a, like I said, it's a state level initiative then about what that looks like to be a professional. Okay.
So how are we, or how can we be similar to a nursing or architecture or social worker and their professional identities? How can early childhood educators get to where they are?
I think you need to really look at outcomes. I think funders really look at outcomes. What is the effect of early childhood educators on the children? Are they beneficial? Have there been studies to show that children that go through Head Start, work out better in kindergarten and beyond? So funders wanna see what effect does early childhood educators really have on children? Is it making a difference? Because those other professions, they see a tangible difference in what they're doing. So I think that if you wanna be taken seriously or, be at the same level as some of these other professions, is really showing or proving that early childhood education works and it's efficient and it's effective for children that you serve.
Definitely agreed with that.
I
Definitely.
think also part of what's tied to funding is even if we can make that impact,
And we
the way,
have,
with that on those that provide the funding, we, as early childhood people, all feel that a smaller client ratio, to put it in general terms, is better for the children. So we can only serve 8 kids in a 2-year-old classroom, where a doctor, a nurse, an architect can serve many, and therefore they're able to make more money, they're able to get other funding. We make our money from what either the state has not left over, but people have to go to work and make their money and then they can afford to pay us. If we can only have 8 kids in one room, those families can't afford to pay the same rate that it would be for a doctor or a lawyer, an architect or
Yes,
something
you're
like that.
right,
And
you're
so
right.
we're caught there
That's true.
with the number of clients that we can serve, getting money either from our parents or from the state.
So, in what ways is the poorly funded, early child education system, how is it a social or racial justice issue? Or do you think it is a social and racial justice issue? I know, tough question, right?
So, for me, the social issue is the funding depending on a particular community or the city that you're in. So, what does the funding look like in Rockford? What does the funding look like in Wheeling? What does it look like in Chicago? And why? In addition, I think until the persons who make the decision in Springfield for our state realize the impact that it has beyond financial, where there's the way this whole self-regulation and socialization, these are skills in the whole process of being inquired. Children develop the ability to ask questions and think and create. It goes beyond grades 0 to 8 years old. That impact and the skills that they learn during those years in our program are skills that will help enrich their lives once they leave. And when you mention outcomes, if we can demonstrate that kids are, especially in that instructional support that teachers give them, that the process of thinking and developing, this can lead to the person who's going to be an engineer. This can lead to the person who wants to be a doctor. It doesn't just hit them when they get to 3rd or 4th grade. This curiosity about learning and thinking and analyzing and feeling good about what I can do and who I am, it's a motivator. So until everyone values what early childhood education has an opportunity to do, the potential that it has for this future citizen, this future student, it's amazing. And I think that beyond the outcome, but just understanding the citizen that can be created, the student that can benefit from being an early Head Start, then they would fund it more.
And that's definitely one of the goals of the Power to Profession, is to bring everybody on the same level where, for instance, in the decision cycles, one of the questions in number 3, which is what they're on at 3, 4, and 5, is how many levels are within the profession and how do they vary? So there are 3 levels currently that they're trying to implement for this next decision cycle, which the first one is the Early Childhood Education Professional Training Program. Then the second one is the Early Childhood Education Associate Degree Program. And the third is the Early Childhood Education Bachelor's Degree Program. And then eventually the Early Childhood Master's Degree Program and how it prepares. So, and the broad descriptions of all of these is what will you need to be at what level and what will we do in that level and to move forward. So, for the first one, to just have just the Early Childhood Education Professional Training, a minimum of 120 clock hours, and you have to have experience in the field, and it aligns with all the professional standards and competencies. The second one, to have an associate's degree, is a minimum of 60 credit hours, but it's a college level coursework. And then the level 3 is considered the bachelor's and the master's for right now. And you have to have a minimum of 120 credit hours of college coursework. But for the master's, it's typically 30 to 50 credit hours of college coursework above the bachelor. But with the bachelor's and the master's, it's expected the depth and breadth and the scope of the practice is so much broader than what you would need for the other ones. But based on those levels is how they want everyone to be the same across the board. So if we're all
those national levels, state levels, rubric,
Yeah.
where did that come from?
this is part of the task force working together to develop. I'm sorry, I'm showing you this, to develop the cycles for 3, 4, and 5, which will they're still voting on. So this is just the introduction of it. It's nothing in stone yet except for cycles 1 and 2. So 3, 4, and 5, they plan on being finished by July.
This is Macy's.
So this is Macy's beginning
Okay.
of how they want to do the levels in early childhood education, how we can meet across the board.
Is that similar to the gateway
That's
that we
what I
have
was
for the
It is
Illinois?
similar to
That's
the
what I was
gateway.
For Illinois, where we have our
Except gateway
rubrics
is
of
Illinois, right?
credential, for
Yeah.
credential 1, credential
Mhm.
2,
It's-
credential 3.
It's coming out
very
of
similar.
the race to the top
Mhm.
from the federal level.
Yes.
Mhm.
But it'll look different in every state, because I was
Yes.
thinking it was gonna be something national,
Mhm.
but how specific would it be and how would we implement it, I would assume would then be a state thing, because I'm thinking everybody's on the same page.
Well, nationally, we will be on the same page for certain things. Like, for instance, we have requirements that we have to meet for Head Start. We have requirements that we have to meet for child care. We have requirements that we have to meet for CPS. We have different requirements, and that's the same, the way that this will run, except nationwide, we'll be on the same level as far as credentials. Nationwide will be on the same level as far as the minimum amount we can get paid. Nationwide will be on the same level as far as when I get more credit hours, when I go to a higher degree, what's the next step, what's the next role, what's the next plan. But it also will depend on not only your state, as far as continuing that, but what program model are you in order to help with this also. So once they start getting to the decision cycles, 6, 7, and 8, we'll find more about what they will expect from programs. What do they expect from other individuals that aren't in the same necessarily Head Start or child care or preschool for all or any of that. So how will we all come together and be on the same level nationwide, but also help our programs to become on that same level in each state?
And I would see the federal government supplementing that in a financial component.
Yes.
Because just as she was, when you were speaking about the classrooms and generating income for a 2-year classroom, for example, with 8 kids in Illinois, 8 kids in Mississippi, income level and their cost of living and their hourly wages are different. So this whole support and infrastructure, there's got to be a financial component to supplement and enrich the whatever policies that are developed.
But if we all are highly qualified early childhood educators, we are all taught on the same level, we can all teach on the same level, and we know the same things. But because you are a doctor or a lawyer or a nurse, you're paying more for your child care. Yes. But within this profession, we can't determine you can't pay this because you make this, or we determine now, okay, if you're qualified for the program because you make a certain amount of money or you make under the poverty guidelines and all that good stuff, but we're still child care. We're still considered a child care agency. We're still considered a private child care agency, honestly. So just because I make a certain amount of money, I qualify for Head Start, but my friend is a lawyer and she makes a certain amount of money, but her child qualifies for child care, and the fact that you're going to pay out-of-pocket expenses for your child to get the high-quality early childhood education that we're all getting on the same level. So we're still getting the same level of early childhood education, but you're paying more money because you make more money. But as we come together with the federal funding, state funding, there's money in early childhood education. And the money is continuing to roll in and they're continuing to grow, but we have to promote our profession in how can we get more? How can we make it to the top? How can we get paid?
How can the teacher in
As a
Mississippi
nurse.
get paid the same amount as somebody in Illinois? That's what I'm saying. Their income, their hourly wage, for me, if we're all gonna get paid the same amount of money, states have their own salaries that they give for early childhood educators. So, once again, the federal government's gotta supplement. There's gotta be a supplementary from the federal government to empower and to ensure that these types of professional standards and expectations not only are created, and once I get all these credentials, when I move to Mississippi, instead of me making $15 an hour, I make $8. So I wanna keep my 15.
But also on the flip side, you want to make sure the level of training is the
But
same.
the training, I can accept that. I mean, I agree with the training level about all of us moving